Hi, everybody. We're back, and we're going to be talking about adolescence this segment. Specifically, talking about puberty. So, adolescence is that period of time that ranges from puberty to the beginning of emerging adulthood. So, let's explore what puberty. I have a sneaking suspicion that many of you listening know what puberty is because you had the joy of passing through it. Um, the thing about puberty is that the sequence is predictable, just like we talked about with babies' physical development, uh, predictable timing of different skills arriving, motor abilities. Puberty is the same way. The sequence is predictable, but just like it was with the timing is not predictable. It occurs when individual's body is ready for it. So when we say that the sequence is predictable, it allows us to have this canalization chart. You guys remember from infancy we had canalization. So this norm chart gives us an idea of what things happen when, approximately at what age. Of course, there's a lot of variation between people for when these actual events will occur. So we'll explore this table in more detail later. The important thing right now to note is that there is a sex difference in age of onset. Beginning of puberty is somewhere around for girls and somewhere around 12 boys. The ages might sound young to you if you're thinking that puberty begins with menstruation. It doesn't. So let's talk about that. What happens at the beginning of puberty is that the hypothalamus sends out hormones that signal to the pituitary gland to start secreting growth hormone that activate the adrenal glands. And the pituitary also secretes gonadotropin releasing hormone that causes the maturation of the gonads, the ovaries, or the testicles. This is called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and then the HPG, which is the hypothalamus pituitary gonadotropin axis. So call gonadotropin releasing hormone GnRH. You're going to see that in other places, so I'm sure you knew what the shorthand meant. They give us the shorthand for growth hormone. I thought it was kind of strange that they didn't give us the shorthand for gonadotropin releasing hormone. These axes together determine onset of puberty. It's increase in testosterone and estrogen, sex of the person, and those hormones then lead to growth spurt and arrival of primary and secondary sex characteristics. Now the thing is, if we want to be more specific, at this point, between the pituitary gonads, very specifically we're talking about follicle stimulating hormone and then luteinizing hormone. Those are the hormones that will cause the ovaries and the testicles to actually mature and start functioning as sexual reproduction sites rather than being inert they are in childhood. All right, so we've got our HPA axis and our HPG axis. All right. So back to the onset of puberty. There's the interaction of a person's genetic makeup helps to determine when puberty will begin, as well as their state of health. A person who is ill going into puberty, that might delay the onset of puberty. And environmental factors, exposure to toxins or the amount of exercise or hard work a person does, whether it's a stressful environment, like that. So the first thing that usually occurs is a growth spurt. Now we've been talking throughout the lifespan about the cephalocaudal development that we go through up until puberty. So if you look at this chart, you have a baby on the left who's 0.42 years old, so that's about a 5-month-old. And then we have a baby who's 0.75 years old, so that's about a 9-month-old. We have a 2-year, 9-month toddler. And we have a 6-year, 9-month child. The 12.75 body is the one we're pretty much looking at right now. And at this point, with the onset of puberty, we leave the cephalocaudal development, proximodistal development. And now finally, the extremities are going to start to catch up. So the legs are significantly longer. The arms are going to get longer. The feet get bigger. The hands get bigger. So for the first time, we aren't going to see development proceeding from the head down and from the center out. Instead, it's going to be the extremities that are going to be growing most rapidly during this period of time. So a lot of times you'll notice in an adolescent, I think there's even a picture in our book that she puts out a adolescent who's going through puberty, and they have what appears to be a fairly short body relative to the length of their legs and their arms. And that's because during this growth spurt, the arms and legs sort of shoot out, and the body doesn't do any growth. By 25 and 75 100ths of a year old, 25 years, 9 months old, you see the fully formed, fully proportionate adult form. And so finally have grown into our heads, our torsos and arms, and our legs have this proportion. So we have that growth spurt where the arms and legs are growing. This is a growth pattern for boys versus girls. It's that the girls' growth spurt happens earlier than the boys' does, on average. There's a lot of variation among us. So you may have girls who are still shorter than the boys around them, or boys who are growing much earlier than their peers, their average numbers. So you see 2-year difference in the onset of weight for boys and girls. That causes that discomfort during adolescence, right? That think back to middle school when the boys and girls were not really at the same level of maturation. But the boys who maybe were ahead got advantage from that. The girls who were growing and maturing with a source of teeth. I mean, there's all this stuff that goes along with the fact that put kids together based on age, not based on maturity, either physically or even emotionally. So, being at the challenging times is probably why we all remember puberty, so because it's kind of challenging. There are two main kinds of changes that are going to occur during puberty that are really important for taking a child into a reproductively capable person. Primary sex characteristics are those that involve the organs that we use for reproduction. So we're going to have changes that are going to make the organs start working to produce potential offspring. So let's start with the girls. And here's that table that I started to show you earlier, the canalization table that shows you the order of changes. And I really wanted to focus in on the primary sex characteristics. So the first one on the list, ovaries increase production of estrogen and progesterone. So that's a primary sex characteristic. That's a change that needs to occur in order for this girl to ultimately start ripening eggs and be able to carry babies. Also, primary sex characteristic is that the uterus and the vagina begin to grow larger, again, facilitating reproduction. Menarche, the first menstrual period. You'll notice this is about 3.5 years after the ovaries have started to produce sex-specific hormones. So menarche, first menstrual period, occurs on average. Today it's about 12 and a quarter years, which statistics you look at. First ovulation will happen about 6 months after that. So a young woman will menstruate probably 5 or 6 months before she's actually going to start ovulating. Let's see. We've observed a secular trend in the onset of menarche for girls. What that means is that across several generations, we've noticed a change in the onset of menarche on average. So here's a really classic old set of data. Norway started collecting data on age of first menstruation as far back as 1850. The USA doesn't start until 19. So Norway has the earliest data, followed by Finland, Sweden. I'm not sure what that fourth country is. Oh, that's Norway coming out the bottom. Sorry, I got my own graph. Perfect. So we've got Norway, Finland, Sweden, and then we got US out there. And what you're noticing is that that line is going down to the right. So whereas in 1850, girls in Norway were starting their periods at almost 17 years old, by 1950, they were starting their periods at 13 and a half. Now, this is not a change that you would have noticed necessarily from a mom to a daughter. This is more likely to notice between a grandmother or maybe even great-grandmother and then the daughter. So you've got not that noticeable a change, but it's accumulating, getting bigger. In fact, if I zoomed into the data for the US, we see that girls in the US by 2000 were having menarche at around 12 and a half. And today, we're another generation out from that. We're looking at about 12 and a quarter. So this is what we call a secular trend. Over time, we can see it change. Whatever behavior we're studying, in this case, we're looking at menarche, is getting earlier. So it begs the question, what's causing this? Why are we seeing this drop in age of first menstruation? Here are some of the things that the World Health Organization has examined to try and explain onset of menarche. So we have environmental things outside the circle, and then we have personal differences and individual differences on the inside of the circle. So in the inside of the circle, we have exposing genetic factors that could directly lead to things like sensitivity to insulin, the growth of the uterus, growth after birth, fertility levels. And then we have some other things that are unique to the individual, like control of potential, whether the person was exposed to certain illnesses or not, sexual differentiation, how this person has internalized their sex and their gender, those kinds of the weight, height, and it says adipose mass, that's your that person's carrying. And then over in the lower right, it says timing of, so for the individual, their time, which includes, as you recall, not starting menstruation, but the onset of hormones being secreted. We have external factors like the level of stress that they're exposed to. Chemicals might disrupt the system, like fertilizers have been shown to interfere with endocrine functioning. Environmental impacts, things that might be going on in the environment, make the person more likely to sick or to gain or lose weight, things like that. And then nutrition, which directly may impact how much insulin they're producing, as well as how much weight, how much fat they're carrying. So these are all things that they've explored. And they think it's a multifactorial event. But you'll notice that they don't have on here, these are the things that they've explored and that have been shown to have some kind of impact on the timing of menarche. Things that they've explored and rejected are things like whether there are hormones in food that the people are consuming. That seems like a really obvious, well, if I eat something that has hormones in it, it'll give me hormones, it will speed up puberty. It turns out that we don't metabolize hormones out of food the way that we would if we took a pill or something like that. The animals already metabolized it. So that's been discarded as a potential explanation. Instead, what we've been focusing on is a few really important factors. One is how much fat the girl has accumulated up till this point. Have a minimum of 18% body fat, then you are carrying enough weight to support menstruation. So having adequate body fat seems to be one of the critical factors. So nutrition is going to be looked at for that. One of the things that we've seen over time that might account for the secular trend is that we have got a much more protein-based diet that allows us to gain that kind of weight earlier. Also, today have a lifestyle that doesn't require as much actual heavy work, so that we can build up more fat, less muscle mass, so that can help to trigger perhaps the secretion of hormones, like that. So it may be a combination of nutrition and then physical work. About a 1900 era American girl, she probably had to run to the spring and get water. She probably had to walk to school. What do anymore? She might have cows. If you're looking at average Americans, a lot of them lived on farms back then. So their physical work, stress is another factor they've been looking at. And one stressor that seems to be associated with early menarche is having a stepfather in the house. There have been a lot of explanations for why that. The kind of stressor that trigger early menstruation. One hypothesis is that it might just be a purely genetic effect. She's menstruating early. Maybe her mom did also. That's why she had already been married once and had one set of children and then now was married for a second time. That might just be all it is. It has nothing to do with stepfathers being particularly stressful. But lots of studies have borne that out. Stepfathers in the house that's associated with earlier menstruation. I hit them all. So basically, the things that seem to be carrying the most weight are the nutrition explanation, exercise explanation, stress explanation. All right. Think about that. Interesting question. Why are we seeing earlier ages? And then the ancillary question of that is how low can it go? And of course, we don't. Boys have changes that they're going to go through also. It's our chart for boys. What we're going to be looking at for primary sex characteristics, like testes start to produce testosterone around 9.5 years old. The testes and the scrotum are going to grow larger. And this really interesting picture that kind of illustrates how the volume of the testicle changes across the lifespan, so that they're fully mature adulthood, full-sized sperm. But in puberty, they grow in size. Penis growth begins around age 12, and first ejaculation capped around 12 and a half, but we're not really sure. Unlike girls who get asked, how old were you when you had your first? Boys don't get asked how old were you when you first ejaculated. So we're kind of guessing how old they probably are based on those boys who do report, just kind of comparing it to girls. So those are the big changes that have to make us reproductively capable. Girls start menstruating, releasing eggs, and boys start releasing live sperm. But these are pretty private events, and like I was just talking about, boys don't necessarily ever have to report how old they were when they could ejaculate. So luckily, we were provided a set of secondary sex characteristics that allow people to kind of judge our level of maturation pretty accurately. If we imagine that all these people had clothing on instead of creepily standing there naked, you would be able to tell the adults from the adolescents really because of the way their bodies are shaped, right? So these are going to be the outward signs of maturation that allow observers to be able to tell a person's level of maturity without having to look closely. They have nothing to do with reproduction. So these secondary sex characteristics are cues of maturity. They don't help making babies or anything like that, just attract mates. So let's pretend like we have clothes on. Kind of creepy. So let's start with the girls. Big things that happen to girls are the depositing of fat or breast tissue, and then the widening of the hips relative to the hips. So part of the widening of the hips happens from a little bit of a twisting of the pelvic bone. It's a little bit of extra width, but it also happens from laying down fat on the hips. And American women are not super happy about that. That's how you get the wider cheeks. And men all around the world rate 7/10 size of their hips as attractive. So it's like a universal cue of physical or reproductive maturity. Men all around the world respond to that. For the man, you can see that there's a lot more that testosterone does to him. So for women, absence of testosterone allows them to deposit fat in certain places. For men, the addition of testosterone makes their bodies a little bit more angular. Notice the adolescent boy is drawn an adolescent girl as far as the shoulders, the arms look, but the adult, you see more angularity to that. And that's because with the addition of testosterone, body fat gets lost. The shoulders get wider than the hips, whereas female shoulders are roughly the same with their hips, maybe a little bit wider. So females are designed a little bit more like an X, and males are designed a little bit like a Y or a capital T. So broader shoulders, narrower hips. See in the face, if there's testosterone presence, you'll see the jaw gets wider. Adolescent adult, the jaw tends to hit. The Adam's apple will start to protrude, and of course the voice drops. That happens in the beginning of adolescence. Go through that squeaky phase, and then the voice drops. Addition of facial hair, that's all. The eyebrows get heavier. These are all signs of testosterone. In both sexes, you see the addition of armpit hair and pubic hair, what we call axillary hair. So both sexes. So for males, as they age, it becomes easier for them to build up muscle mass, whereas for females, it's harder to build up muscle mass. So these are all the secondary characteristics that allow us to tell very easily an adult from a child, a person who doesn't reach reproductive capability. Are not I don't know what the attitude on main campus is for Eastern, and so that's something I'll have to be figuring out right over there. Like, what do the students like? Do they want hard copies? Do they want ebooks? And so I'm kind of in limbo, not knowing exactly what I'm getting into. So. Yeah. Exactly. And you can't fix all of them with one change, that's for sure. So